Hello, everybody. I am Nick Hauselman, the co-host of the Muckrake Political Podcast, and Jared Yates Sexton is out again today, but I am pleased to bring in the show to discuss psychological aspects of the political race with Nick Carmody, who is a psychotherapist and a lawyer and has also been on the show before with a terrific interview we had back in 2021. And Nick, I'm so glad to have you back on the show.
I appreciate you having me on again, Nick.
That's great. Well, us Nicks need to stick together. There's not too many of us.
Right.
So, at any rate, I thought let's just dive right in here because, again, it's funny having dealt with this since 2015 when the guy came down the gold, escalator. We've been wrapping our heads around how is it possible that people could be drawn to this kind of person? Why isn't it obvious that he is who he is? We've had a lot of time, a lot of data to kind of examine this, figure this out. So I'm kind of wondering, I think the dopamine rush of sort of following this guy and dunking on liberals was a thing that we talked a bit about last time. And I'm wondering if there's been a transformation since then in terms of how he's continued to maintain this focus on him and his methods.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We talked about Don Lemon appearance right before the show, and that was one of the things that I was hoping to get into that conversation, but there was 5 of us and I kind of jumped around. And we were talking immediately after the RNC convention. And one of the things I've been observing is that, and, the left and Democrats and liberals, you could hear that in some of the guests that were on that show with Don Lemon. It was just everybody's exhausted. Everybody's frustrated. Nobody really wants to kind of observe the political situation or MAGA or Republicans or even Trump through any nuance or even evolution, right? It's just kind of like, hey, we've been seeing this shit for 10 years. We know who he is. We know who they are. And it's just kind of fixed in our mind. But one of the things that I sort of alluded to in that after the RNC, when we were talking about Kid Rock and we were talking about, I think it's Amber Jones, and we were talking about Hulk Hogan and talking about Dana White, and then all of the different guests they had, is that initially much of the support for Trump was simply about, in tort law, it's called intentional infliction of emotional distress, or what we know as owning the libs, right? And for a lot of people initially, so much of politics right now, it fills so many different voids in people's lives. One of them is it's become a source of entertainment. Another one is, and this is where we get into some of the conspiracy theories and the QAnon stuff, is that, people who used to buy the National Enquirer or those types of celebrity gossip magazines or the absurdity of some of that stuff that was on there. Well, now they can just plug into politics and they can get everything they ever got at the checkout line from the National Enquirer, through QAnon, or they can get everything they want from an entertainment standpoint by plugging into certain shock jocks or the 5 on Fox, where it's constant trolling, it's constant kind of trying to trigger each other, and that was definitely the case early on. But one of the things that I think that, or at least they're trying, and there seems to be some regression since the RNC. Obviously, Trump you can't control him, but what I was starting to see was that there seemed to be kind of a maturation or evolution of the MAGA movement, where at least some people in the movement were trying to create something that would draw people in other than just this immature, petty conflict and triggering each other. And we saw that we're going to have Gold Star moms on there, right? At the RNC convention, we're going to have the mom whose kid died of fentanyl. We're going to have, the black woman in the lower socioeconomic community who was talking about crime. They had Amber Jones, who was obviously, as the left was getting caught up in the hypocrisy of family values because they had a porn star on there. What many in the MAGA community were seeing is, oh, she's a deplorable. Now they're attacking her. Now they're condescending her. And I can relate to that. And even, whether they're a secret subscriber on her porn site or they kind of condemn her because they actually walk the family values talk, they could relate to her from a condescension and a disparagement standpoint to where, hey, I can relate to her. And then you got a lot of different, a lot of these younger guys, the Joe Rogan watchers, Guys who I just wrote something the other day about Dana White. Dana White, masculinity washes Trump, right? For all his whininess, for all his bitchiness, for all his faux tough guy, just victimhood. He's, he's the antithesis of actual masculinity or tough guy. But a guy like Dana White, masculinity washes him to where now you got tens of millions of MMA fans who otherwise weren't engaged in politics, who suddenly might be because they're listening to Joe Rogan and they were pissed off because the gym was closed during COVID and they couldn't go grab a happy hour and get dates during COVID, or because Dana White's, bringing them onto the MMA stuff, or, hey, I like Kid Rock stuff and Kid Rock's pushing them, or, I'm a wrestling fan. I mean, how many wrestling fans prior to the last couple of years do you think we're plugging into policy, debates about politics? Not very many. And so I think they've done a really good job of trying to, mature the movement and get into, and there is some legitimate shit. I mean, the border is a problem. Fentanyl is a problem. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's all, the left's problem, the fault for all this stuff, but politics is about defining your opposition. And there are a lot of legitimate issues that, that the right does, have a point with, but we've fallen into this trap in politics where, if the other side's for it, I got to be against it. And we saw this a lot. One of the reasons when I've talked to people in my personal life about the border, is that one of the reasons why the left was kind of slow to start to admit to it. One is because you're not going to see it on MSNBC because they're not going to disparage their own people. But two is, for years we heard about the migrant caravan coming before the elections. And they were tracking this and how many times that it was mentioned on Fox News prior to the election, and then it would just fall off after. And so it's kind of like the boy who cries wolf. When you hear about, the caravan, and it's not happening. And then all of a sudden there is a problem at the border, and the left is, oh, yeah, we heard this shit before. You guys have been demagoguing this issue, and we no longer, we're not going to, we don't believe it's happening. And it's also not being covered by left-wing media. And then suddenly it's a big issue. And then once it is an issue, then the left doesn't want to talk about it because it is an issue. And then you just kind of fuel the fire for that issue. So,
wow. Wow, you covered so many things. Let's unpack a bunch of these things. So I think, one thing I find interesting in my other life as a basketball coach, what I have to do is quickly as possible is ascertain what personality type each person is, so I can then figure out what lens to use to communicate, right? There's ways to do this. I always say there's 12 different kind of personality types. Is that low? Is that high?
According to the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, there's 16. Okay. There's different theories of personality,
So there's the 16 point, and the quicker you can kind of figure that out, the quicker you can understand how best to communicate with people, and then also probably to figure out, who you're going to be friends with and who you're not going to like to hang out with. So I'm wondering, is there a through line in terms of a personality type that does seem to gravitate? Because I feel like what you're trying to say is what the Trump administration kind of brilliantly did was tap into an electorate that had never participated in politics before, using, we'll talk a little bit about some of the methods they're using, but it seems to me that maybe there's a limited supply of that. And it's that they get more and more desperate. They have to get more desperate in their methods to find just the last few people they could get to maybe flip an electoral college vote in a swing state, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, it's cliche at this point, but obviously fear has always driven politics, right? If you can scare people into thinking that, and it happens on the left, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a liberal. At this point, I'm so disgusted with tribalism that I can't affiliate with any party. I am also guilty of that, because how many times have I written that Trump is an existential threat, right?
Right.
Now, just because, two things can be true at one time. He can be, but that can also stoke fear in people, and that drives politics. Now, my intent isn't to stoke fear. My intent is to try to observe and analyze and explain that, on an academic or intellectual level, psychological level, but that can still be the effect. Now, that has absolutely been the intent on the right? I mean, we have seen it. I just wrote something the other day about the use of fear to try to, why some women still support Trump. And one of the one of the things that will always instill fear in really anybody, any parent, but especially with mothers, is when they feel like their children aren't safe. And we have seen that. I've written many times with Tucker Carlson on his show where he was talking like, they hate you, they hate your children when they come for you, and they will. That type of fear mongering, that scares people. And one of the things that we've seen throughout history with demagogues and with kind of authoritarian figures is that if you can create the perception of chaos, if not actual chaos, then people are willing to vote or in some cases install a strong man to restore order. And that's kind of the underlying premise that goes on with Trump. And with the case with some women is that, if you think that the other side is worse, if you think that the gender ideology is coming for your kids, if you think that the immigrants are coming for your kids, if everything that you hear politically scares the shit out of you and makes you fear for yourself and for your kids, I use this evolutionary psychology kind of out of the lens. Well, the fear of the unknown back in hundreds of thousands of generations, when you're dealing with a opposing tribe, was that they were going to come in. They might kill your kids because they want to reproduce and pass down their DNA. They're going to rape you. They're going to kill you, whatever it may be. And we, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, we still kind of carry a lot of this stuff down with us. And so one of the things that may have happened to hundreds of or thousands of generations ago is that the leader of your tribe may have been what we would, call now a psychopath, right? He may have been abusive, may have been mean. He may have been, treated you and your kids horribly. But he may be better than the other guy's tribal alpha. And so, we're going to stick to this tribe because the fear of, or the known is worse than the unknown. We kind of get a little bit with that, maybe perhaps with Trump, is he's an awful guy, right? We know he's treated women horribly. We know he's a con man. We know he's a fraud. We know he's committed all kinds of crimes. However, we're so scared of what how the other tribe is defined, that we have to rally around this guy because he's so awful. We know that he can defend us because he'll do anything, and he's shown that.
Wow. So let's get into the personality types then, because for some reason it doesn't scare me that way when I hear it. And for some reason I can understand that he's lying, 160 times in a short, press conference. But it seems to me like, and I'm sure you've seen, like, if you scroll Twitter, or X, you'll see a lot of interviews with people at Trump rallies, right? And you mentioned sort of policy, and people ask substantive questions about policy, what these things mean. And they have generally, I know they're cherry picking and they're editing these things, but I think I've seen enough of these to indicate that there is a lack of understanding of the political process itself and how democracy works. So to me, there must be some sort of like maybe a through line personality wise that they're able to tap into that is separating these tribes in terms of liberal or conservative or Democrat and Republican. What do you think about that?
Yeah, some of that can be personality. I think what a lot of it is that it comes down to the tribalism. In many ways, is about a sense of community, and it's about identity, right? And especially in certain, so much of the culture war is geographical. Politics is geographical. Obviously, Trump is big in the South, or he's big in rural areas. And if you're somebody who maybe you weren't kind of like the pro wrestler fans, right? Or we've talked about, or the MMA fans. If you're somebody down South or in the Bible Belt who wasn't really into politics, but now politics has basically become the primary source of entertainment, of identity, of community, you want to be a part of that, right? And I think we may have even talked about this 3 years ago when I was on there. And there's research that shows that there's areas of the brain that are active when we experience physical pain, that are also active when we experience social isolation or exclusion. And so that would suggest that there's, theoretically, there's almost a painful experience to be socially isolated or excluded. Well, in this context, if Trump says something, everybody at my church, everybody at the gym, everybody at my office, everybody and all of my family members, whatever it may be, whatever your little community is all huge MAGA or huge Trump fans, and you say, you know what, that's bullshit. That didn't happen. Or this guy, I'm not voting for him. He's a con man. Well, what's going to happen to you? You're going to be excommunicated from the tribe, right? And again, going back to evolutionary psychology, what was the result of that hundreds of thousands of generations ago, if you got kicked out of the tribe, you're dead, right? And so we still carry some of that fear with us. We still carry some of that, that anxiety about not being part of that. And then you take it, into that fMRI scans where, the same areas of the brains are active, and it's just easier to go along and get along. And it almost becomes, I guess I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's almost like you hear of like Jewish people. Some people are practicing Jews. Some people are just culturally Jewish, right? Some people are practicing political, obsessed people. Some people are just culturally, politically obsessed, or they just follow politics culturally, right? They don't necessarily follow it because they're actually engaged in a policy, but everybody else is doing it. So it's just some identity, and it's a sense of community. And so I think a lot of people just kind of get caught up into it. It's like a tailgating party, like at a college football game. And it's easier than going against. It takes a lot to go against that, especially right now, because so much of your political views are we attach values to it. And if you're not, anytime somebody says we don't share the same values, what they're usually saying is your values are shitty, right? Your values are inferior to mine. Nobody says we don't share the same values. You have higher values than me, right? And so anytime we attach values to politics, which we do around abortion, all the religious stuff that goes into it, then that makes it even harder, because not only are we dealing with all of the issues with the tribalism and the identity and the sense of community, but you don't want to be perceived as somebody who's a bad person, an evil person, somebody who doesn't share the values of everybody at your church, everybody at your gym, your family, all of that stuff.
It's interesting the way you're describing it now, years into this, because I think in the beginning, the real focus was, again, that dopamine rush, where there was a literal physical energy that was created when they got wrapped up in these issues, be it, on the border or in trans, all sorts of things like that. And I almost feel like over time, there must be a deadening of that, where you don't get that same rush all the time over, months and months and years, because now you're describing it as, wanting to be part of the pack and not wanting to ruffle feathers or whatever, which is sort of a little bit less. Because I get it. Like if you picture, the French Revolution and Les Mis and the music and the lights and the camera, that crane shot, that is exciting. That is something that will make you really, feel a rush. Like I am standing up for the existence of this country. And I almost wonder if you feel like that just can't sustain itself anyway over enough time.
Well, I think early, we talked about the dopamine. I've written a lot on dopamine and how it factors into stuff. But I think that, and to kind of go back to what I was saying earlier about early on, it was fun, right? Triggering the libs and, mugs with, liberal tears are delicious and, all that type of shit. That was fun. But it has kind of metastasized or morphed from fun and entertainment to now it's anger and it's existential. Right now, it's not just about owning the libs. Now it's maybe about making sure I have enough ammunition for the coming civil war against the libs. Right. So it's become much more intense, much more angry. There's something in sociology called the ratchet effect, right? Where, something only goes in one direction, right? When you have a ratchet, like a socket set, right? It only goes in one direction. You go the other direction, it's click, 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 and then it's torque, click, 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 torque. And that kind of happens with society and with culture. Things only kind of go in one direction with the ratchet effect theory. And you kind of see that with what's happening, right? It started out where it was fun, and it's kind of ratchet effect down to where it's becoming more intense and more angry. And, just everything feels more existential.
Well, that's fascinating. I love the ratchet idea. And let's actually pivot towards Trump himself, because it's enough. This is the guy that's leading this thing. This is the guy that's like a Pied Piper. And I wonder if people were talking a little bit about how he shared a photo of the airplane of Kamala Harris, where he tried to insinuate that because the reflection of the plane doesn't show anybody in it, that the crowd that she had at their hangar was fake, despite every video we've seen that shows a huge crowd there. People that I talk to are sort of thinking like this is the indication that Trump is really starting to falter and perceptually, dimensionally, or whatever it is. But I'm not even sure if he's changed that much. I kind of feel like he's been dabbling in this kind of ridiculousness for so long. But have you seen any kind of progression along those lines?
Well, I think he's getting more desperate. First, let me say, to whatever extent they are doctoring photos or they are manipulating that stuff on the left, it's, and I was written some of the stuff about the couch jokes and stuff with JD Vance, is that you can't bitch for years, almost a decade, about misinformation and disinformation and lies and alternate realities and all this other stuff, and then engage in the same behavior. And so to the extent that it is happening on the left, I think it's wrong. It's a mistake. And you're basically, you're giving fuel to the right you lose the moral authority when you're accusing the other side of doing something and you're doing it. So I hope that that's not happening, in whatever case. But as far as Trump, I think he's getting worse. I think that he's getting more desperate. He knows that look he had on. I wrote something about the press conference the other day. He came out, the look in his eyes, the tightness in his mouth. A lot of times when he comes out, he's very animated with his mouth. And as I wrote in the article, the notable time that I really noticed he was animated with his mouth was when he was talking about Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, and it indicated contempt for him. And I know there were times when Trump was president where, he had a lot of loans. He had hundreds of millions of dollars in loans. He wanted interest rates lower. Obviously, it helped him. It helped him for the economy, helped him to get elected. So I'm sure there's some friction with the Federal Reserve, with Trump. But he seems at this point, he went from basically feeling like he had a shoe-in with Biden to suddenly having this momentum flip around on him, especially after he got shot. Or shot at, and Nick, whatever happened with him, that's another thing I don't really like to cool about, because he got shot at. If you're in that position, whether it was a piece of glass from the teleprompter or the bullet, whatever it was, that experience was real, right? That there's, you can't detract from that. But having that experience, having the momentum shift around, seeing the crowds bigger for her, seeing the enthusiasm, knowing that if he loses, he's probably going to prison. Having the effects of aging come upon him. I just saw a video the other day where he paused for 21 seconds. I don't know if you saw that.
Well, in fairness, supposedly there was someone having a medical issue in the crowd, and they were attending to it. I saw that, but I did read it a little bit more. But you don't have to use even that. If you need, there's plenty of evidence of what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because I saw that. I didn't send anything out because I just saw it, and that again, those are the types of things that don't manipulate. There's so much shit on Trump to use. You don't have to make stuff up or manipulate things or embellish things to make him sound worse than he is, because he's awful as he is. And so I hate when that happens. But one of the things that I think we're going to see with Trump, you've probably heard the phrase, may even used it when we talk about the aging process and our parents or grandparents, is we go out the way we came in, right? And so when we come in, we're almost very childlike, in our advanced ages. When we come in as kids, it's almost the entire world revolves around us. We don't even have the consciousness to know that, but it does. Our survival, our parents' world revolves around us. Our family's world revolves around us. There's this, this almost this narcissistic focus on us where it's only about us. As we get older, as kids, we start to develop self-awareness, right? We start to realize that other people have feelings, or don't take his cookie, or don't hit him, or whatever it may be. And so as our self-absorption starts to wane a little bit, our self-awareness increases, and our awareness of others, and then into adulthood, then it becomes more, about other people, our kids, than it is about us. Well, then it's kind of like the bell curve. When then we come down the other side as we start to age, well, then it becomes less about other people, and it starts to become more about us as we start to lose that consciousness, as we start to, whether it's Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever it is. That's a natural progression, right? Now we start to be the one that everybody's focused on and taking care of when we lose the self-awareness and the consciousness of how we relate to other things. Well, that's the normal process. Imagine if someone's entire life, like Trump's, was malignant narcissism, where the entire world revolved around. There's no bell curve. It's flat the entire way from, basically birth to now he's 78 years old. Well, as he starts to kind of regress and devolve throughout that process, he's going to become, his narcissism is probably going to exacerbate in a way that's not even tempered by his grasp of reality, worse than it is now, his grasp of reality, or his grasp of his surroundings, in a way that people's grandparents or parents happens, but theirs is happening independent of, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. So I see him getting worse, and in a way that is going to be tough to predict, but not shocking. And I think that especially when his, becomes self-preservational, knowing he's going to prison, knowing that he's losing, I think that he is going to, continually just kind of devolve from where he's at now. And he's already in a bad place.
Right. And part of me thinks that, out of the desperation, like you mentioned, that's really where it's going to maybe quote unquote appear that he's getting worse, when he's simply just getting more and more desperate. But because I guess my take on it was he was in the White House. He was on his iPhone. I'm sure everyone was being able to tap into that anyway and hear whatever he was saying. And people were calling him and giving him all kind of crazy conspiracy theories that he was taking in then. So to me, I don't even know if it's a progression or as much as just sort of how he's always been. And now it's just as a desperation kicks in for the fear of, obviously being arrested again or being arrested and being prosecuted for a lot of other things is going to kick in. And it's interesting how it's captured the country in that sense where, getting shot at, being found guilty in the court of law, in his mind somehow is a good thing. Right. He's been able to tap into more and more, other places, like even like with the Black community. He wants to say, well, because your group of people in this country have traditionally been, maligned by the police and by the Justice Department, I am like that, too. We are now the same. And I think at some point, maybe before Kamala jumps in the race, there seemed to be even polling that would indicate that he was gaining in those sectors. And again, is this even something that is thought out psychologically? Are there people behind the scenes who are being able to craft these messages, understanding how it'll affect the people? Or is he able to do this somehow with that knowledge, or innately or instinctually?
Well, it's probably both. I mean, Stephen Miller, as pathological as Stephen Miller is, he's pretty effective in what he does. I mean, he's an awful guy, a dangerous guy. I think that a lot of the stuff that comes, through Trump comes from Stephen Miller. So I think there's absolutely that. And it would be interesting to see, like, behind the scenes, was it Chris LaCivita, what the dynamic is between, because, back when it was Bannon and it was Jared Kushner, they couldn't stand each other, so it'd be interesting to see what's the dynamic between the people trying to run a professional campaign and, the whispers that Stephen Miller's putting in Trump's ear. It would be interesting to be a fly on the wall. But obviously Trump is, he is very instinctive and his ability to push people's buttons and his ability to scare people and his ability to kind of trigger people's hatred of others. So, I think it's a combination of both. He's very good at doing that on his own. And I think that it's probably, somebody like Stephen Miller can kind of give him maybe it's, certain facts or certain details about stuff that Trump can just kind of naturally, instinctively process and kind of propagate.
That's fascinating, especially because, whatever Miller writes for him on a teleprompter, he can't seem to get through a teleprompter without adding, 50% of it is just off the cuff. And it's funny because you can tell, he's not a good reader, right? He can't really emote that way. But then all of a sudden when he switches, it's obvious. Now, there's a conspiracy going on from the people as the polls have shifted, that the people in Trump's camp are sabotaging him. This is how bad it's gotten now in the desperation, I suppose, where it's like there's no other explanation besides someone is always there to try and push him down or whatever. It's nothing of his own making. And I find that fascinating, too, how that is starting to pop up. And I feel like how is that generating itself? How does that gestate into and to get people that far where they would believe that whoever is joining the campaign is trying to sabotage it?
Well, it'd be interesting because you could see that coming from different directions, right? I mean, that could be something that's planted by provocateurs on the left. I don't want to say on the left. We'll just say anti-Trump people, okay, to get in Trump's head. You could see that being a Lincoln Project ad or something George Conway would have out there, where it'd be like, just to make Trump think that he can't trust his inner circle, right? Hey, there's leakers out there. There's people out there who there's a conspiracy theory that they don't have your back. They're turning on you. So you could see that being kind of planted or put out there. But you could also see Trump. Trump's never going to take accountability for anything. It's always going to be somebody else's fault. He's always the victim. He hires only the best people, except for all the people that he fires because they're incompetent. And so you can see that coming from Trump. You could see that coming from people outside of the campaign who aren't happy with maybe Chris LaCivita not being as intense or not being as aggressive enough and being critical. So you can see that coming from lots of different directions. I mean, one of the One of the things I have seen that people have asked me is, is Trump throwing the election? Absolutely not. I mean, there's, he's probably going to prison if he doesn't. So he's not throwing this. If anything, he's going to take everything and everyone down with him before he throws this election.
Speaking of Trump again, the narcissism and this the basic personality disorders that he has, are those can those develop naturally without external stimulus growing up, or do you feel like, there's some information about how he was raised and what he did throughout his youth. So do you feel like that was external pressure that sort of comes to bear to create this kind of personality, or are there other factors?
I think there's probably cases where people can just, psychopaths where you're born, brain deformities, whatever it may be. But I think in many cases with people, especially people who aren't, nearly as severe as Trump, and people, that I've worked with, or survivors of people who I worked with who have had people in their relationships, or even people in my personal relationships, is that in my observation, there seems to be a predisposition and then a triggering experience, and that experience could be, years long. That's why you may see, you have one or two pathological parents who engage in pathological parenting, two kids basically siblings basically exposed to the same thing. One develops disorders, the other one doesn't. Why? They were basically exposed to the same thing. There must have been some type of genetic or personality predisposition that did or didn't exist that caused one to develop and one didn't. Now with Trump, maybe he just was born with a certain predisposition that was going to be extreme anyway, and then exposed to Fred's pathological parenting and told that you either win or you're a loser, you got to be a killer. All of the things that he was exposed to, having the money, everything that came with it. And then obviously no accountability, never being told no throughout his life. And we end up with what we have now.
Interesting. Yeah. They send it to military school for a reason. And I don't know if a lot of people in that economic level of wealth would normally send their kids to something like that. So that was another interesting, I'm sure, formative experience for him. It does also seem like there are some, I guess we'll have to call them normal conservatives, the people that we thought for sure would reject Trump right away. And there were the never Trumpers who would still say, well, I got to vote for the Republicans. I'm sorry. I can't stomach whatever's on the left. I have to vote for him. But it does seem like there's a little bit of a thawing now. And we're seeing some sort of grassroots movements towards these normal Republicans who are finally saying we have to actually vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, because rather than even sitting it out, which would probably be almost the same effect at this point. So do you think that there's a sort of the fever is breaking? Is there some sort of fatigue going on here with all of this, and eventually that happens? It seems to me it would be tiring emotionally to deal with Trump on a daily basis like this, even if you were for him. Does that something that is a natural occurrence you feel like that maybe we're finally getting to?
You would think so, but for the last almost decade, how many times have we throughout history of the last 9 years, like, okay, this is going to be the thing, starting with the Hollywood access tape, or, January 6th didn't do that for a lot of people, so I'm really cautious about saying, it's finally happening, because it's, the cult of personality and the tribalism and the sense of identity and community is very strong. It's, I've written something in the past where, two of the hardest sentences for people to admit or to say is I was wrong and I'm sorry. Right. And so, if you're somebody who was arguing with your spouse, or arguing with your parents, or arguing with your kids or your friends, whatever it may be, for 6, 7, 8, 9 years about how they were wrong and you were right about Trump, it's really difficult to suddenly say, you know what, I was wrong. I was wrong that whole time. All those maybe hundreds of hours of conflict that occurred in our relationship, where I was supporting, a severely disordered con man, criminal, traitor. My bad. That's really hard for people to do. It's the more off ramps you pass by on that Trump highway, the harder it is to take the next off ramp. And, so we see that a lot. Now, it doesn't mean some people aren't doing it. And obviously, some event could happen. And maybe, as we talked about, Trump continues to devolve and regress. But, that hopefully that's what happens. But it's really hard right now to say, it's all happening. Now, obviously, Kamala and all of that momentum is making it easier for some people to, I forget who the mayor, I just saw a mayor.
In Arizona.
Arizona. I just saw him do that. That's tough. That's tough to do. And he's doing it. And we may see more of that. But again, is it about principle? Is it about integrity? Or is it just because when the momentum of one wave was strong, I was on it, and now the momentum of the other wave is strong, and now I'm going to ride that one, right? There's a certain amount of cover and safety with that. And, you want to try to give people the most generous interpretation of their behaviors. But maybe that's what it took, right? There wasn't a lot of momentum to do it the other, with Biden and maybe, Kamala Harris, or at least maybe not even her, but all of the momentum of the people who are backing her are providing that for, some cover for people to do that. We'll see.
For sure. I mean, I've been asking a lot of people whether they think it was just simply the absence of Biden, which, after the Biden's debate, and it's hilarious because have you ever seen the Nixon-Kennedy debate, the famous one where he's sweating?
The one that was on the first one. Was that the first TV debate? Was that the one? Right?
Yeah. And they make a big deal about that. Yeah, he was sweating, right? Well, if you watch it now, it doesn't look like he's sweating that much. It really isn't. There's nothing that would make you think about, oh, that was the moment where it kind of broke for Kennedy, even though it supposedly did. But when you watch like the Biden one, I mean, that had to be the low point of the low point for everybody who did not want Trump to win again, because it did feel like that was going to be it. So the question becomes, were people so relieved that he stepped down, it didn't necessarily matter who was going to take his place? Or is it Kamala? Is it her magnetism, which she definitely has? That is, and also she's done. I think she's pretty much been perfect since they launched this thing, which she kind of needed to be, without any mistakes. Do you think it was Kamala, or do you think it was just anybody but Biden?
It was probably both. I don't think people realized how they felt about the situation until it happened. I mean, I think a lot of it was like, one was people weren't expecting her to perform as well as she has so far. And again, we're 90 days out. She could completely tank. Who knows, right? She's, you look at some old videos of her, she was saying a lot of shit. You're just like, oh, you just cringe when she was talking. And, obviously now she seems more comfortable in her skin. It's a 90-day sprint, basically. Just be on the attack. She's a former prosecutor. Well, by definition, what do prosecutors do? They attack. I mean, they're forward leaning, right? It's the defense attorneys that are, on the defense, on their heels, trying to, misdirect and, play legal judo, so to speak. And right now it's just, go 100, full speed ahead. That's all she has to do, as opposed to, oh shit, I got to worry about, I was the top cop in California and I prosecuted black dudes and now the black community is pissed at me. Or, oh, I got to defend George Floyd people because I got to worry about that constituency. Or I got to worry about guys, all that other shit. Don't worry about that. Don't play defense, play offense. You got the biggest target in political history right now in front of you. Go get his ass. And so I think that's part of it. She's more comfortable with that. She's had 4 years too to kind of also evolve and mature. And of course that's gonna be part of it too. And that wave of support she got, and if you're a little bit second guessing yourself, or a little bit unsure, or a little bit lacking a little bit of confidence, and all of a sudden this maybe you're a sports figure, you walk out on the court and 20,000 people are falling for it, are screaming for you. Man, my shot feels like it's going in tonight, right? And maybe that's kind of a little bit of what she did too. She's like, I think I can hit a few jumpers. And then she stepped on the court and got hit by this wave of home field advantage and adoration. And man, my shot's going in. And then you hit a few shots, and then then you're Steph Curry and you're hot and you kind of roll. So I think that's part of it. I know it was the case with me too, as I didn't think that. I thought it would be better. I thought that he had to leave. I was hoping she would be able to kind of handle it, but she has been better than I was expecting. I think that's been the case for most. And I don't think people realized how deadened they had become to, the situation until he left, and all of a sudden she came on, and it was, I think people were surprised by themselves, how they felt themselves, suddenly for the first time in a long time, they felt good about politics, since probably Obama. I mean, there's a lot of similarities in kind of the vibe and the emotion around politics.
I agree. I think there was almost a cloud that was pushed away. I would say half of it was because we just felt like Biden. I mean, I walked away from the Biden debate thinking, how does this guy run the country day to day? Like, I didn't get any confidence he could do that, much less have a debate or finish the campaign. And it's funny because the Republicans are still trying to prosecute that. They want to somehow continue to bring Biden into it. And that it's just sad a little bit when you're watching Trump do these different things and trying to answer questions. In fact, like he had a question where they asked him that since he was shot at with an AR-15. And by the way, I dipped my toe. Have you ever done that where you dip your toe on Twitter in a conversation about sensible gun rights? Has that ever happened to you? And gone back and forth?
I've written a fair amount about the gun issue.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can explore that for a minute. But, obviously, what ultimately what it comes down to is I'm kind of fascinated because I always felt like I had a terrible interaction a few years ago with somebody at a wedding where I thought maybe we could come to an agreement that, maybe not having AR-15s easily purchasable would have been something we could both agree on. And that just it fell apart completely. I think people want to be able to have these AR-15s so they can fight the government, when the government becomes tyrannical. And I don't know if you've ever seen a Neil Brennan comedy sketch where he does this about have you seen this where he wants to have once a year he's like, great, let them fight the military once a year. We'll put it on TV. Fox News can carry it. And it's like, a bunch of people in a field with the AR-15s, and then there's one guy in a bunker with a drone control, and that's it. And then next year they'll come back and maybe they won't get slaughtered in the first 10 seconds. But at any rate, the point being that they had asked Trump about that. They said, would you have any, feelings about maybe having more sensible gun laws since somebody just about killed you with an AR-15? And his answer veered so wildly from Chicago Islands to Afghanistan, didn't really ever answer the question. I'm kind of curious, how does that work? What goes through someone's mind, or how is that functioning or not functioning properly where they can't even address the question when it's asked like that?
Yeah, I actually wrote about that. That was one of the points I wrote in the thread was, they asked him about the AR-15, and then he brought up the gun. Chicago's got the strongest gun laws in the world, and look at their murder rate with guns. And then he went off into Afghanistan, and then he went off into Russia and Ukraine. And then when he finished it, it's like he kind of like all of a sudden realized, he was nowhere near the question, and his voice tailed off about, people, we need to have countries respect us again, which, and then as I finished with is like, remember, this was a question about gun safety. And so I think with, we can all do that. I'm sure I've done it a couple of times today, is that we start talking, it becomes 6 degrees of separation. We lead from one thing to the next and there's like a word association that can take us from one topic to the next. But especially with politicians where they're so conditioned and coached with talking points. And then you add, the emotion, and he's especially in that, he's so pissed off. And as soon as, I remember what we just said the other day, it's like we call it political Tourette's, right? Where, one word literally causes like this reflexive word association, and somebody will spit out a whole nother word. If you're talking about Biden, Hunter Biden's laptop, that type of thing. And so you can kind of see maybe that happens with him. And again, and then we start talking about some cognitive decline or whatnot. But, he just starts talking about something. It makes him think about something else. He jumps to it, makes him think about something. He's pissed off about this. So he's going to say about, he's going to talk kind of like the teleprompter thing. Oh, I'm also pissed about that. And there's this connection between this. And then before he knows it, he's talking about how the world doesn't respect us, and it has nothing to do with an AR-15. And so, I think it's some of a normal cognitive process for most people. But obviously for him, with his anger and his rage and his vindictiveness, and then also he's pushing 80 years old. And he's spent the last 6 months, practicing these talking points, and now suddenly half of them aren't even relevant anymore.
For sure. It's funny. Do you have any sense, like a couple last questions, what we were worried about even in 2016, 2017 was, that he was not disciplined. He was pretty much a terrible candidate. He was able to, again, tap into a subset of the electorate that had never really participated and ground out just enough votes to win that one in 2016. But, I keep always saying, like, it will always get worse, right? And we were always worried that maybe somebody else would come along who was more disciplined, younger, just better package and all those things. But you use a lot of the things that Trump was using to then really take over and become a despot or an authoritarian. So, like, would you have a sense, like, Ron DeSantis felt like that was the guy, right? He was going to be the guy who had he was just a better looking, younger, all those things. He couldn't have had a worse showing in his attempt to win the nomination. Do you have a sense of what the difference is between him and Trump, for instance, that couldn't get him any traction?
Well, I wrote about this at the RNC with Trump, with the charisma. He's just, his charisma doesn't work on you. It doesn't work on me. I don't find it to be charisma. I find it to be kind of manipulative, dishonest, just kind of a con man or a fraud type of he's a late night infomercial salesman who got traction, right? I mean, that's who he is. But it works for a lot of people, and there is a certain charisma to that that has that appeal. But it's tough to there's a combination of this unique charisma with disordered shamelessness to where he'll say and do anything, as well as an absolute disregard for norms or laws. So like DeSantis doesn't have the charisma at all.
Mm-hmm.
Not close. He doesn't have, there's still a certain amount of, he may have an element of shamelessness, but it's not like Trump, right? He still necessarily cares about maybe what people think about him. You can tell he's uncomfortable at times when he's up there because he's worried about what people think in a way that Trump doesn't, right?
Okay, interesting.
And there's still, there's still some elements where he's willing to challenge the Disney stuff that I think in some ways was unconstitutional. But there's still an adherence to just the way that the country works in a way that Trump doesn't care about any of that, right? I mean, Trump's narcissism. Everything that he does is funneled through his narcissism. How does this affect me? How does this benefit me? How does this further my self-interest? And it doesn't matter what it is or who it is. He'll trash it, trample it, destroy it in order for that to happen. And it's unusual in a sense that some people may have that, but they don't have the charisma or the ability to get to that point to acquire the power. Other people may be able to acquire the power, but they're not as severely as disordered as Trump. So it's not to say it can't happen, but Trump is uniquely dangerous in that way.
That's fascinating. And so I always say it always will get worse, no matter how bad it seems right now with this party. And the question now is, it does seem like, okay, there is some sort of cognitive decline. There's some issues with him in reality. What have they hit her on so far? They've hit Kamala on DEI, which doesn't seem to have really worked, although how it got really disgusting, right? Where they were questioning what her race was and whether, and how it was just, he said that she was disrespectful. It's just really horrible stuff that I think really worked poorly, and I think they're moving away. But you have, attacking on the border and things like that. So I'm kind of wondering as the desperation mounts, because again, a 5-point lead in a lot of these swing states is huge in this horse race of a political system that we've built over the last 20 years. Do you think it'll get worse? Is there any sense of like where they could go, maybe even to attack her, that would end up being just as bad as it's been? I suppose there's always ways to get worse.
I think it'll get worse with Trump. I thought I remembered seeing something where there were, closed door meetings where, the Republicans were saying, hey, don't go after her on DEI, don't go after her on race. But, again, Trump will go off the teleprompter as soon as he has that, that reflexive, impulsive, anger or vindictiveness, he'll say whatever. He's uncontrollable. So I think he will get worse. I think that they, for the most part, the right is aware that that's counterproductive. I mean, it's not helpful with minorities. I think that, already she's probably taking back, maybe not as strongly with Black men, but definitely with just minorities in general are probably kind of starting to gravitate back towards her. I think in a similar way as we talked about with Trump and young men and the Joe Rogan crowd and Dana White, and that I think we're seeing a lot of that on the left. I mean, a lot of the college kids who were pissed off about Gaza and Genocide Joe and all that shit. It's a lot harder to pin that on the genocide, the oppressor narrative on a half Black, half Indian woman. It just is. So I think that's tougher. But I do think I do think he's going to get worse. I think he's going to be more out of control. But I don't think it's going to be helpful. I don't think it's going to be effective. It's effective with, a certain segment who's already voting for him anyway. I mean, right. People who it works with they're voting for him anyway.
Yeah. I mean, my argument would be for every one person he converts using hate and fear, there's 1.2 people like in the suburbs that are going to be completely rejected by that. And so it's not 2 to 1 or whatever. It's simply, but there is a correlation where there's a little bit more people who will go against that. And then it'll cause them, I guess, to get even worse. I mean, I know they were talking about her, sleeping her way to the top and things like that. And I have to imagine like that is the cesspool they're going to try and dive deeper into and try and cause all sorts of rifts culturally with that stuff. It's going to be bad. I mean, I remember thinking how bad it was going to be when Hillary ran and the misogyny, and it was bad. But I suspect as we get closer, because I think they timed this pretty well. The Biden drops out. They waited for Walz for a week or two. Now the convention bump, right? The convention bump combined with Walz and what they're doing now could give them an 8-point lead, right? Which is way beyond the margin for error and would be a landslide in theory if that held up. And now we get right into, and then they're going to have a debate, right? Do you have any sense of what your prediction would be for the first debate that they're going to have? If they have any more than that, I don't know.
What do you mean prediction as far as what?
I would say Kamala would kill him in a debate. What do you think?
I think she's going to do well. I think, again, if she comes at this, similar to like what she was doing in the Senate hearings over the Mueller report with Bill Barr, who was obviously a very, if not a good lawyer, he knows how to be a lawyer, right? And you could see his wheels were turning in some of his answers and, some of his tailing off of his voice, and she was going at him. And so, again, if she stays in that prosecutor mode and is able to kind of detach from her own emotions, don't let Trump, piss her off and, get her, worked up. If she stays on track and she just stays in attack mode, he's going to give her plenty of material. He would be the dream witness to cross-examine in a courtroom in an important case and basically just treat it like that. Because, he's gonna hang himself. He'll give himself enough rope to hang himself with verbally, so to speak, because he just can't help himself. And if you kind of circle back to your point about people who, like the mayor in Arizona out there, people who will peel off. Well, that really extreme misogyny. Like how many women are gonna who have corporate women, career women who have struggled to get where they want to get within a company and have achieved it on merit, have heard rumors or whispers, a bit that, they did something to get there, or they were dating somebody or whatever it may be. So that shit's gonna, that's not going to land on a lot of women, and or who just don't want to hear the misogyny or the racism. So, that may be, give people, again, that off ramp, like what we talked about earlier.
For sure. I also think that all she needs to do is study the first debate between Biden, because he will repeat what he said there. There won't be much variation. So there were so many times in my notes during that debate where I'm like, why isn't Biden hitting him on this? And there's about 5 really juicy things he could have said. They'll have her prepared for that, I'm sure. So I'm anticipating a really great debate for her. He probably cancels the rest of them if we're ever going to have any more. And so now you can see how it's all planned out in terms of this rollout, and they timed it pretty well heading right into November. So right now it's weird because we've been so pessimistic for so long. It's been hard to keep our audience engaged and upbeat through all of this. And I got to tell you, I don't know if it's the prednisone I'm taking from my back right now, or if it's just the the euphoria of having a new candidate. But for the first time, I feel pretty good about it. And we'll see. But Nick, I can't thank you enough for coming on and breaking this stuff down. Really quickly before I forget, so the things that you look like for physically when you're watching Trump, it's the mouth. Is that the big one, or is there anything else you look for in terms of body language?
I don't necessarily look for body language, but that was what stood out when he first came out. You just tell he's pissed, right? He's raging inside. Now, I thought he did a good job of managing that rage for the most part, but you could see it. It was apparent that he's pissed off. From his perspective, for good reason. Hey, I had this in the bag. I'm canceling all these cases against me. This dude's, got dementia. I'm going to be president again. And then all of a sudden everything changes. And of course, in his narcissism and his perverted sense of, everything's unfair, that doesn't go 100% his way, that triggered him, and he's not handling it well.
Absolutely. Well, again, Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Tell everybody where they can find you and how they can read all your stuff.
So I'm on Twitter at Nick_Carmody, and I have a Patreon account that I don't have a paywall. I got about close to 130 articles on there now. Every thread that I write, I try to rewrite it and either expand upon it or combine it with other threads, and I post it on Patreon, and that's patreon.com/Nick Carmody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Nick, for coming on. I always look forward to reading your stuff, and we'll have to talk again soon.
Oh, one other thing. I was invited by Bandy Lee to be a contributing author for the sequel to The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. So it's going to be the More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. That book is going to be coming out. There's going to be a all-day event at the National Press Club in D.C. where we're going to have the same speakers from last time, and I'm assuming some new ones. So yeah, I'm excited to be invited. That was a huge honor, and we'll see how that shapes out.
Awesome. Can't wait to see that too. So thanks so much again, Nick, and thanks everyone for being here. And Jared will be back again for our Friday show, so stay tuned for that, and we will see you later. And please, everybody out there, be safe.